Dad perfect revents. Did you get the invoice I forwarded? That's the first thing my daughter-in-law Beverly said when I finally reached her on the phone that Tuesday afternoon. Not hello, not how are you doing, Howard. Just, did you get the invoice? I'm Howard Mitchell, 57 years old, and I've been retired from mechanical engineering for about 3 years now. My wife Patricia passed away 4 years ago, and sometimes I still catch myself wanting to tell her things. But this phone call, this was something I really wish she was around to hear. I told Beverly I had received the invoice. Good, she said. The supplier needs payment by Friday, or they'll hold the next shipment. I said I'd look into it, but before I could ask what I'd actually called about, she hung up. I stood there in my kitchen in Riverside, Ohio, holding the phone and looking out at the yard I've been maintaining for 25 years. The oak tree in the corner had turned completely yellow. The question I wanted to ask was simple. When is the grand opening? See, my son Eugene had been planning to open his physical therapy clinic for nearly 2 years. The place was called Oak Ridge Physical Therapy, and it was supposed to be everything he'd worked toward. His degree, his years working for other people, and the $180,000 I'd put in from the retirement savings Patricia and I had built over 30 years of working. I retired from Caterpillar after 31 years designing hydraulic systems. Patricia was a nurse supervisor at Riverside General. We weren't rich, but we were careful with money. When Eugene came to me in the spring 2 years ago with his business plan, I believed in him the way only a father can. I didn't ask for a board seat or my name on anything. I just asked that he keep me informed and treat me like his father, not just an investor. For the first year, he did exactly that. We talked every Sunday. He'd walk me through the renovations, show me pictures of the equipment, tell me about hiring his first therapists. I remember when the new treatment tables arrived. He called me from the clinic, excited as I'd ever heard him. Those were good months. Then Beverly took over the business finances. Now, I want to be fair here. Beverly has an MBA in healthcare management, and she's obviously organized and driven. Eugene explained it made sense for her to handle the administrative side since she had the background. But from the moment she took control, our Sunday calls got shorter, then less frequent, then they stopped altogether. Instead, I got occasional text messages and forwarded invoices like the one that Tuesday. I told myself this was normal. Businesses get busy. Adult children have their own lives. But there's a difference between giving someone space and being pushed out. And I was starting to figure out which one was happening to me. Looking back now, I can see the pattern clearly. First, Beverly suggested I didn't need to visit during construction because of the noise and safety concerns. Made sense at the time. Then she mentioned that too many opinions might confuse Eugene while he was making important decisions. Also reasonable. Before I knew it, I'd gone from being Eugene's sounding board to being someone they'd update when there was something significant to report. The Friday after that invoice call, I decided to drive out to the clinic. It had been about 3 months since my last visit. Beverly had mentioned over the summer that construction noise made drop-ins disruptive, so I'd respected that. The drive from my place in Riverside to the west side of town takes about 35 minutes through neighborhoods I know well from when Patricia and I used to visit her sister. I found parking easily. The street was quiet for a Friday afternoon. I walked toward the building and stopped dead. There were plants in the windows, framed certificates on the walls I could see through the glass, a professional sign above the door. Oak Ridge Physical Therapy in clean blue letters on white background. The clinic was open. Clearly, unmistakably open. Through the window, I could see a receptionist at her desk, typing. 2 people in the waiting area with paperwork. I didn't go inside. I just stood on that sidewalk doing the math in my head. The sign looked weathered enough. Not brand new, not put up last week. The plants had grown into their pots. There was a faint water stain along the bottom of the sign, where rain had run down. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a soft opening that happened last week. This place had been operating for a while, maybe weeks, maybe longer. I'd invested $180,000 of my retirement money into this business, and I was finding out it was open by accidentally driving by. I went home and called Eugene that evening, straight to voicemail after 3 rings. I tried again the next morning, 2 rings, voicemail. My own son was sending me to voicemail. I sat with that knowledge for a day before calling Beverly. She answered on the first ring, which told me something. Right there. When did the clinic open? I asked. There was a pause. Not long, but enough. The soft opening was about 6 weeks ago, she said. We did a quiet launch, just family and close colleagues. I wasn't invited. My own son opened the business I'd invested my retirement savings in, and I wasn't invited. Eugene wanted to keep it low-key, Beverly continued. You know how he gets about pressure. I did know how Eugene gets. He's been sensitive to stress since he was a kid, worried about tests, performances, anything he cared about. I'd always tried to protect him from unnecessary pressure, but I'd never in my 57 years considered that my presence at my son's major life event might be categorized as unnecessary pressure. Beverly, I said, keeping my voice level the way you learn to do in 31 years of dealing with project managers and budget meetings, I put $180,000 into that clinic, which we're very grateful for, she said. Eugene will call you this week. He didn't call that week. Now, I'm not the type to act on impulse. Patricia used to joke that I could turn ordering lunch into a full engineering analysis. But there's a difference between being methodical and being passive. As the days passed without hearing from Eugene, I started doing what any reasonable person would do when they suspect they're being managed rather than respected. I started paying attention. That weekend, I went through my records, every transfer, every email, every receipt related to the clinic over the past 2 years. I've always been thorough with documentation, habit from 3 decades of engineering work. When I laid everything out on my dining room table, I started seeing a picture that had been hidden in the details. The original agreement between Eugene and me wasn't a formal contract. I'd suggested one early on, but Eugene looked hurt. Dad, this is family, he'd said, and I felt small for suggesting otherwise. What I realize now is that was exactly the reaction he was going for, whether he knew it or not. What I had were emails where Eugene described my contribution as an investment with family terms. No formal interest, no fixed repayment schedule, but an understanding that I'd be treated as a silent partner with the right to major milestone updates. His words, his email. The clinic opening was definitely a major milestone, but there was more. I started noticing patterns in the invoices Beverly forwarded, equipment I didn't remember approving, a consulting fee that showed up month after month, paid to something called Torres Consulting LLC. I'd never heard of Torres Consulting, but it had been getting $2,800 every month for 11 consecutive months. That's $30,800 of my money going somewhere I knew nothing about. I'm not an accountant, but I spent 31 years teaching young engineers to follow the logic of systems. And the logic of these numbers was telling me something I didn't want to hear. The next Monday, I called my friend Vernon Adams, who retired from corporate law about 3 years ago and spends most of his time now playing golf at the country club. We met for lunch at a diner downtown. I brought the emails and invoices, spread them across the table between our coffee cups. Vernon didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Howard, do you know who owns Torres Consulting?" I didn't. You should find out. That afternoon, I hired a forensic bookkeeper named Carol Wright, a retired woman who does contract work and doesn't ask too many questions. I gave her everything I had and asked her to trace where my money had really gone. She took 2 weeks. When Carol came back, she brought a summary printed on 3 pages and a look on her face I recognized from delivering bad news to project teams for 30 years. "Howard," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with her folder. "Torres Consulting LLC is owned by Leonard Torres. Leonard Torres is Beverly's brother." The words hit me like a system failure you never saw coming. Her brother? That's right. And from what I can tell looking at public records and LinkedIn, Leonard doesn't have any background in physical therapy, healthcare management, or really anything that would justify a monthly consulting fee. Carol opened her folder and showed me the documentation. Bank routing numbers, corporate filings, a paper trail that was clear as day once you knew what to look for. Beverly's brother had been collecting $2,800 from the clinic, from my investment, for nearly a year. "There's more," Carol continued. "I found some other expenses that don't quite add up. Equipment leases that seem above market rate, office supplies from a vendor that appears to be another family connection. All told, I count about $34,200 in questionable expenses over the past 11 months. I sat there staring at the numbers on the page. $34,200. That was almost 20% of my total investment, money that was supposed to be building Eugene's future, instead being funneled to Beverly's family. What's my recourse here? I asked. Carol closed the folder. That depends on what you want to accomplish and how much fight you've got in you. Later that week, I had another conversation with Vernon. This time we met at his office. He still keeps a small practice handling estate planning and corporate work for old clients. Here's what you need to understand, Vernon said, reviewing Carol's findings. Eugene signed personally for everything. The lease, the equipment loans, all of it. Whatever Beverly told him about the business structure, he's personally liable for every dollar. If this thing goes sideways, it's Eugene who takes the hit, not Beverly, not some corporate entity. That revelation changed everything. My son wasn't just being manipulated. He was being set up to take the fall if the financial house of cards collapsed. Do you think Beverly knows about the personal liability? I asked. Vernon shrugged. Hard to say. But I'll tell you this. Someone with an MBA in healthcare management should understand basic corporate structure. Either she knows and doesn't care, or she's not as competent as her credentials suggest. I spent that evening walking around my neighborhood, thinking about Patricia and what she would have done in this situation. She always had a way of cutting through complexity to find the right path forward. Follow the facts, she used to tell the nurses on her unit when they were dealing with difficult situations. The facts will tell you what you need to know. The facts were clear. Beverly had been systematically directing my investment money toward her own family, while excluding me from major business decisions. Eugene either didn't know or didn't want to know what was happening with the finances. And my son was legally exposed in ways he might not even understand. On a Sunday morning, I called Eugene. He answered on the fifth ring. Dad. He sounded tired. Not surprised exactly, but like a man who'd been expecting a difficult conversation. I'd like to come by the clinic, I said. Tuesday afternoon. Not a surprise visit, I'm telling you now. A pause. Sure, Dad. I'd like Beverly to be there too. Longer pause. I can ask her. Please do. The Tuesday meeting wasn't easy. I spent the weekend preparing like I used to prepare for budget reviews, methodically, without emotion, focused on reaching understanding rather than assigning blame. I brought Carol's report, my emails, and bank statements showing the transfers. Eugene and Beverly met me in the clinic's small back office. Eugene looked like he hadn't slept well. Beverly looked composed, but in that rehearsed way people get when they've been preparing for something. I placed the documents on the desk and said quietly, I'd like to go through these together. Dad, what's all this about? Eugene asked, glancing nervously at Beverly. It's about $34,200 of my investment money that went places I didn't approve, I said. And it's about Torres. Consulting LLC. Beverly's face didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Torres Consulting provided legitimate services during the setup phase. What kind of services? I asked. Business development, regulatory compliance, vendor negotiations, she said smoothly. And Torres Consulting is owned by your brother Leonard. Eugene's head snapped up. What? You didn't know? I asked him. Eugene looked between Beverly and me. I knew we were using a consulting firm. I didn't know. He trailed off. Beverly jumped in. Leonard has experience in small business development. It made sense to use someone we could trust. For $2,800 a month for 11 months? I asked. That's over $30,000, Beverly. Eugene approved the consulting arrangement, Beverly said, but her voice had gotten defensive. I approved consulting, Eugene said slowly. But I thought it was maybe $500 or $800 a month for a few months. Not. He was looking at Carol's summary, and I could see him doing the math. What followed was an uncomfortable hour where the details came out piece by piece. Beverly explained that Leonard had helped with vendor negotiations, regulatory paperwork, and business development strategies. Eugene said he'd signed off on consulting expenses in general, but hadn't reviewed the specific amounts. Beverly said Eugene had been aware of the costs. Eugene said he'd trusted Beverly to manage the financial details and hadn't looked closely at individual line items. The painful part wasn't whether they were lying, though there were moments I wasn't sure. The painful part was watching my son realize, with me sitting there as a witness, that he and his wife had very different versions of what had been happening with the business finances. Dad, Eugene said finally, I'm sorry. I had no idea the consulting fees were that high. I believe you, I said. But here's what concerns me. According to these documents, you signed personally for everything. The lease, the loans, all of it. If this business has financial problems, it's you who's on the hook, not Beverly, not some corporation that might protect your personal assets. Eugene's face went pale. What do you mean? I showed him the lease agreement and loan documents. You're personally liable for all of this. If the clinic can't pay its bills, the creditors come after your house, your car, your personal bank accounts. Beverly said, "We had corporate protection," Eugene said, looking at his wife. "We do have an LLC," Beverly said, but it doesn't protect you when you sign personal guarantees," I finished, "which is what you did on all the major contracts." Eugene was quiet for a long time, staring at the papers. When he looked up, he asked, "What do you want, Dad?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I want this acknowledged formally, a written accounting of everything that went to Leonard's company and a repayment plan. Not because I need the money back, Eugene, because I need to know we're operating. Honestly, going forward. Beverly said she'd need time to speak with her accountant. I said I'd give them 2 weeks. On my way out, Eugene followed me to the door. Beverly stayed in the office. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the parking lot. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I know you are. I really didn't know about Leonard getting that much money." I looked at my son for a long moment. I believed him. I believed he'd signed his name to things, without reading them carefully, trusted his wife to manage details he didn't want to deal with, and built a successful clinic on a foundation he hadn't fully inspected. Eugene had always been the visionary, the one with the big picture, who needed other people to handle execution. It was both his strength and his vulnerability. "That's something you're going to have to fix," I said. "Not for me, for yourself. You can't run a business by signing papers you haven't read." 2 weeks later, I received a document from Beverly's accountant, a full accounting of clinic expenditures, including Leonard's fees totaling $34,200 in payments I hadn't explicitly approved. Attached was a repayment proposal, monthly installments over 18 months from projected clinic revenue. I reviewed it with Vernon over the phone. He said it was fair given the circumstances. I said I'd accept it with one condition. Any future expenditure over $5,000 would require my written approval. Beverly agreed when I called her. She didn't sound pleased, but she agreed. "One more thing," I said before hanging up. "I'll be visiting the clinic on the second Tuesday of each month for a brief update on operations and finances." There was a pause. "Eugene will be expecting you," she said. What happened after was slower and less dramatic than what came before. Eugene and I resumed our Sunday calls. They were different, shorter in some ways, more careful, but also more honest. He told me things he hadn't before, that the first few months had been harder than expected, that he'd been embarrassed to tell me about difficulties because he didn't want to disappoint me, that he and Beverly had been arguing about money long before I got involved. "I should have asked more questions about the consulting fees," he said during one of those calls. "I just trusted Beverly to handle the business side while I focused on patient care. Trust is good," I told him, "but verify is better. That's something they taught us in engineering. Measure twice, cut once." He laughed at that. "You've been telling me that since I was 10 years old. Some lessons bear repeating." Over the following months, I learned more about what had really been happening. Eugene started asking Beverly more detailed questions about expenses, and apparently she didn't appreciate the scrutiny. Their arguments became more frequent. Eventually, Beverly admitted that Leonard's consulting had mostly involved helping her set up the payment systems and vendor relationships. Work that probably could have been done by their regular accountant for a fraction of the cost. She said she wanted to keep business in the family, Eugene told me. I can understand that, but not at those prices. The monthly repayment started arriving on schedule, $1,900 per month, automatically transferred from the clinic's account to mine. Beverly had wanted to stretch it over 24 months, but I'd insisted on 18. I wasn't trying to hurt their cash flow, but I also wasn't interested in dragging this out longer than necessary. My monthly visits to the clinic became routine. Second Tuesday of each month, 2 p.m. Eugene would give me a brief update over coffee, patient volume, insurance reimbursement rates, equipment maintenance, staff changes. Beverly was usually around, but she kept our interactions professional and minimal. Fine by me. During one of those visits in the spring, Eugene mentioned wanting to buy a new ultrasound machine. "The one we have works fine," he said, "but this new model has better imaging capabilities. Could help with diagnosis and treatment planning." "How much?" I asked. $18,000. I was quiet for a moment. Under our agreement, anything over $5,000 required my approval. But, more than that, this was the first time since our confrontation that Eugene was asking for my input on a business decision. "Show me the specs," I said. He pulled out a folder with equipment brochures, comparison charts, and financing options. He'd done his homework. The new machine would improve patient care and potentially bring in additional revenue from diagnostic services. "What does Beverly think?" I asked. "She thinks it's unnecessary. Says the current machine is adequate." I looked at the numbers again. The financing terms were reasonable, and the projected revenue increase would pay for the machine within 2 years. "I think you should buy it," I said. Eugene smiled. "Really? You're the clinician. If you say it'll improve patient care, I believe you, and the math works. That phone call, the one where he asked for my input before making a significant purchase, meant more to me than any grand opening celebration could have. It meant he was treating me like a partner again, not just a source of funding. I was never invited to the original grand opening I'd helped make possible. I never got to stand at the door of the clinic I'd invested in and feel that particular pride a parent feels at a child's achievement. That was taken from me, and I won't pretend it didn't matter. But that December, Eugene called on a Friday evening and asked if I'd like to come to the clinic for an early Christmas dinner. Just him, Beverly, and me in the small staff kitchen with takeout from the Italian place next door. I said yes. I sat at a folding table in my son's clinic, with takeout containers between us and a string of Christmas lights Eugene had hung along the window. Beverly was polite but distant. Eugene seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. The clinic was quiet. They'd closed early for the holiday. "Dad," Eugene said as we were finishing our meal, "I want you to know something. This place wouldn't exist without you, not just the money, though obviously that was huge, but the way you handled everything. You could have gotten lawyers involved, made it ugly, maybe even cost me my license if things had gone badly. You're my son," I said. "We work things out. Beverly and I are doing better," he continued. "We're communicating better about business decisions, and I'm paying more attention to the details instead of just signing whatever she puts in front of me." Beverly looked uncomfortable, but didn't say anything. "Good," I said. "That's how it should work." I thought about Patricia that night, driving home through the quiet streets of Riverside, about the 31 years I'd spent designing systems that had to work under pressure, and about what it really means to invest in something. Money is the easy part. You accumulate it slowly, you transfer it in a single decision, and then it's gone from your account and out in the world. What's harder is the other investment, the one you make in a person over decades with your patience, your presence, and your willingness to stay at the table even when the accounting gets complicated. Eugene's clinic is doing well now. The repayments arrive every month without fail. I visit on the second Tuesday of each month, and Eugene gives me updates over coffee, patient load, referrals, equipment maintenance. The ultrasound machine he bought in the spring has brought in enough additional revenue to pay for itself ahead of schedule. Beverly and I maintain a professional relationship. I don't think she'll ever forgive me for exposing Leonard's consulting arrangement, but that's not my problem to solve. I'm 57 years old. I've buried a wife, finished a career, and navigated more difficult conversations than I care to count. The lesson I keep coming back to is this. A contract isn't a sign of mistrust. It's a sign of respect. It says I take this seriously enough to put it in writing. If you're a parent who's invested in a child, money, time, trust, and you've started feeling like you're being managed instead of respected, I want you to hear this. Your feelings are information. Don't dismiss them. Don't tell yourself you're being difficult. Ask the questions, read the documents, request the accounting. And if your child is worth believing in, and most of them are, they'll sit across from you at that table even when it's uncomfortable, and they'll work through it with you. That's what family means. Not the absence of difficulty, but the willingness to face it together with honesty and respect. Remember this, when someone consistently excludes you from decisions involving your own money, they're not protecting you from stress. They're protecting themselves from accountability. The moment you feel like you're being managed instead of consulted in your own investment, trust that instinct and demand transparency immediately.